I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 82 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, October 17th, 2023, and the adopted motion of Wednesday, December 13th, 2023, the committee is resuming consideration of Bill C-49, an act to amend the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation Act and the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts. Since today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. We therefore ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of the interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged in, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Additionally, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. With us today for the first hour, the Honourable Seamus O'Regan, Minister of Labour and Seniors. And now we will proceed with Minister O'Regan with an opening statement, but with joining Minister O'Regan, we have from the Department of Employment and Social Development, Helen Smiley, Director General, Strategic Integration and Corporate Affairs, Department of Natural Resources, supporting the other departments, Abigail Lixfeld, Senior Director, Renewable and Electrical Energy Division, Energy Systems Sector, and Annette Tobin, Director, Offshore Management Division, Fuel Sector. Minister O'Regan, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Welcome.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour.
Thank you very much, and hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to discuss Bill C-49 here today.
Newfoundland and Labrador have relied on ocean forever. And others across Atlantic Canada have too. It's who we are, it's what we know, and we are very, very proud of it. Bill C-49 recognizes a significant opportunity, and out my way, when you see an opportunity, you grab it. I'm old enough to remember when the Accord was born at the hands of people like John Crosbie and Brian Peckford and Bill Marshall. I was lucky enough to work for Premier Brian Tobin when we hit Hibernia First Oil and wrote those first speeches. But I can tell you, in the time in between, times were bleak because of the cod moratorium. Oil saved my province. Times were bleak, and then we started to build our offshore. And I remember First Oil, and I remember thinking, we don't have a clue what we're doing. Didn't know what was possible. But we knew it could be done, and we knew we had to go for it. And jointly managed and regulated through the CNLOPB, we stayed the course, and people prospered. In fact, people went right across this country, built up energy and oil and gas right across this country and around the world. But we started in what the CEO of ExxonMobil has described to me, Newfoundland's offshore, as the harshest environment in the world that his company operates in. We found a way. More importantly, we built up one of the most skilled labor forces that the world's ever seen, and people noticed, and companies noticed, much like they're doing right now. Look, the world is evolving. Where we get our energy and how we get it is evolving too. So naturally, the Atlantic Accord should evolve. Unions agree, industry agrees, the provinces agree. Because the world is looking for wind, and it's looking for hydrogen, and Newfoundland and Labrador, God knows, has the wind, and we can produce the clean hydrogen that the world is rushing to get. I must admit, I had my doubts, but then I stood there on a landing on a runway in Stephenville, Newfoundland, to see the German Chancellor's plane land with some of the top CEOs in possibly the world, the CEOs of Siemens and Mercedes, and they were telling us that they wanted to buy our hydrogen from us. This race around the world is on, and delaying this anymore is like starting the race with your shoelaces untied. Markets are moving. Business is moving, investment is moving. We need to skate to where the puck is. Today, the Alberta Investment Management Corporation just announced a new billion-dollar fund dedicated to global energy transitions and decarbonization sectors. Look, this is a challenge, and we are proud to take on a challenge. We applaud the engineering skills that builds a West White Rose gravity-based structure, because it is the same skills that builds the wind turbine monopiles that are stored right next door there in Argentia, Newfoundland. The same CNL-OPB that has managed the offshore for decades will usher in the same success for wind and for hydrogen. Newfoundland and Labrador's Offshore Industries Association, one of the biggest advocates of our offshore over the years, they've already gone ahead and changed their name to Energy NL because they know where the market's headed. The very same Energy NL who in 2022 changed their vision, they now look to a sustainable and prosperous lower carbon energy industry. They get it. They're following the money. This industry will be built. It's already happening. China is already producing half of the global supply of offshore wind, and you think China's slowing down. Do we want those jobs going to China? No, thank you. I want Newfoundlanders and Labradorians on the ground floor of this trillion-dollar industry. I want them supplying the world with wind and hydrogen and taking home the profits. Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, Canadians should not lose out on this. This is about the livelihoods of thousands of workers back in my home province. It's about their families. It is about them doing what they do best. This bill was drawn up with the provinces of Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia. The premiers want it, Premier Furey, Premier Houston, one Liberal, one Progressive Conservative, both urging that we get ahead of this, that we get on with it, because they want it, because businesses in their provinces want it, because workers in their provinces are the best in the world at it. We have done it before. We will do it again. On a fait dans le passé.
We've done it before, and we'll do it again. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for your opening statement. Colleagues, before I begin our first round, I just want to remind everyone I use these two cards. Yellow, 30 seconds. Red, time's up. I'll try not to interrupt you in mid-sentence, but I will be waiving these, and if I have to interrupt you, I will, just to keep our meeting on time and on track. So we will now begin our first round from the Conservative Party of Canada. Shannon Stubbs. Ms. Stubbs, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to your department officials and Minister O'Regan for being here. I've enjoyed many of our conversations about the inextricable links between Albertans and Atlantic Canadians who over generations have built each other's provinces to the benefit of all of Canada. As a first-generation Albertan, and you and I have talked very much about our common roots, and as a daughter of a Newfoundlander, I care deeply, just like you do, about offshore petroleum opportunities for Newfoundlanders, Labradorians, for Nova Scotians, for all Canadians. I also care deeply, and Conservatives care deeply, about future opportunities in new and renewable technologies. And just as you have outlined, it is surely true that the same pioneers and innovators who have unlocked offshore Newfoundland and Labrador with incredible talent and technology are the same pioneers who unlock the oil sands, and they'll be the same pioneers to lead the future of alternative technology development and the fuels of the future. But here's what my concern is about C-49, despite the mischaracterization from your colleagues. I won't hold that against you because you haven't been here at the committee. This is the problem with the bill. You know the global market for offshore petroleum exploration and development is highly competitive because it's extensive in scale and cost and risk. Even exploration is outstanding in that way. So this is why it is very important for the regulatory and fiscal regimes to be certain, clear, predictable, and fair, because they are, in fact, inextricable from the business case decision that private sector proponents would make. So the truth is, as you know, for offshore petroleum development, the reality is that about only a private sector proponent will spend years and years, raise millions of dollars in capital, head towards exploration, and may only do about 3 or 4 bids a year, and they can choose anywhere in the world to go. just as you've said, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have led the world in this effort. And in 2022, of course, 5 bids were bought off the offshore in Newfoundland and Labrador, worth $230 million. That represents thousands of jobs and spin-off jobs and economic opportunities for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians and all Canadians. Bill C-49 was introduced in May 2020. That was the number in 2022, 5 bids. C-49 was introduced in May 2022. There was another bids for offshore petroleum exploration off the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador in November 2023. Do you know how many bids there were?
No.
0. There were no bids. So this is what my concern is. And the same story is being shown in production, where in 2020, Newfoundland and Labrador produced over 100 million barrels per day of offshore petroleum. Today, I know that you know better than almost anyone, that's fallen to over 35% to less than 67 million barrels a day. Those are the consequences of layers and layers of anti-energy policies and legislation. That's why Conservatives oppose Bill C-49, because it's very clear that the uncertainty and the lack of clarity, and the proof is already in the pudding, will end offshore petroleum development. And the truth is that lack of certainty and lack of clarity will also be a barrier to private sector proponents who want to develop offshore renewables, because they require the same things around certainty and clarity and consistency. So I wonder if you, like me, will call on your minister to fix Bill C-69, since C-49 is full of sections that have already been declared unconstitutional. Those sections are in this Bill C-49. That causes the exact same kind of uncertainty and clarity that will prevent both offshore petroleum developers and private sector proponents who want to get into offshore wind renewables. Are you also concerned that the government has not done a single thing to fix C-69 now in 110 days, but Bill C-49 includes Section 61, 62, 169, and 170, which all come from C-69, and they're all unconstitutional?
Well, let me elaborate perhaps on the premise of the question, because I definitely agree with you. The competitiveness of our offshore was tantamount, and I can tell you, Paul Burns is in the room from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. I got an earful as soon as I got elected, because the problem that we were confronting was that the Conservative government that preceded us had managed to take a 300-day timeline in exploratory wells and make it 900 days through SEA 2012. It put us completely out of the ballpark when it came to competing with the North Sea or competing with Norway.
It's been in place
which
for
we
9
have
years,
reduced from 900 days to
right
90
now,
days.
And we're dealing with
We reduced
Bill
it from
C-49.
900 days to 90 days. And ironically, I know
So,
you
Minister,
said a lot of disparaging thing about the IAA.
We have
So the timelines
Minister, I'll
and-
ask you to just hold a sec, hold your thought. We have a point of order from
Who's actually not on the
Mr.
question, I
Aldag.
guess.
Mr. Aldag.
Well, I'm going to go back to the same issue that we had a couple of days ago with members asking questions but not allowing our witnesses to be able to respond. You've spoken about
He was talking about a government
difficulty
9 years ago.
of the interpreters and other staff being able to do their jobs. If we have multiple people speaking, I think that you should remind the committee that if they're asking questions, that they should give the courtesy of the minister to actually respond to the question.
So thank you, Mr. Aldag, for your point of order. Colleagues, it is important that we have one person speaking into the mic at one time, so the interpreters who do a tremendous job can interpret effectively. And so let's make sure that we do allow, as the question comes, the minister can finish his answer and his thought, and then you can proceed to another question. I hope all colleagues can abide by these rules for the best interests and functioning of our committee, but most importantly, that for the interpreters, who we want to make sure who do concise and accurate job of interpreting. Minister, if you could complete, you're in mid-sentence, complete your thought, and then we can go back to Mr.
Yeah, we were able to reduce the time from 900 days to 90 days using the regional assessment provision that's contained within the IAA, because the way you did it before is you kind of myopically looked at this section here and that section there, and you had different environmental assessment and all the consultations. The red tape and duplication was the worst I have ever seen in my time in public life, which extends a few decades.
Thank you, Minister.
And what we were able to do is reduce that, do one massive
I'd like to talk
assessment,
about
and we reduced those
C-49.
games from 900 days to 90 days.
Yeah,
but I had
except-
to correct that.
Yeah.
Because that competitiveness
except
is
the problem
really
is
important.
it's not true, because the reality is
No,
in
it's absolutely true.
C-69, the minister has the power to interfere, to stop, start, or extend the timeline of any project assessment for any condition the minister deems necessary. That's why Bill C-69 causes such uncertainty. My concern is that those clauses from Bill C-69 are in C-49. I mean, I will quote you what the Supreme Court said about a section. It said, this section grants the decision maker practically unlimited power to regulate projects regardless of jurisdiction. And this is the problem. So this issue about political interference, being able to set new conditions, also the impact of being able to unilaterally declare anti-development zones, causes great uncertainty for offshore development on both offshore petroleum, but also any private sector proponent who wants to get into developing offshore
industry in which my
renewables.
province relies on for its prosperity. You managed to change the goalpost from 300 to 900 days. That is political interference. We reduced it to 90. Simple as that.
Your government
Thank
has
you,
been in power for 9
Minister.
years.
We do that.
Thank you, Ms.
But there's
Stubbs.
zero bids in
Time
projects
is
offshore
up.
in Newfoundland.
We will now proceed to our next speaker from the Liberal Party of Canada, Ms. Jones, for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Ms. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you, Minister, for being here today. I know that you understand the importance of the Atlantic Accord to Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia probably better than most, having lived through a number of processes as it relates to changes to the Accord. And I have too myself. And it has not gone unnoticed how important the Atlantic Accord has been to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians in building a strong economy and a strong workplace. Not only did they lead the way in offshore oil development, but they set in place the trades, the labor component, the skill development, everything that you need to build on any industry within the province. Today, they're asking to lead in offshore wind, which is a clean energy sector. In fact, Premier Furey has already posted today how important it is that the province of Newfoundland and Labrador sees passage of Bill C-49 amendments, and so they can move forward on the bold path that they've carved out for themselves in offshore wind in Newfoundland and Labrador. So, Minister, I want to ask you today to bring to light to this committee how important this bill is to Atlantic Canadians, to the labour force, to the families that live there, and to the overall economy of Atlantic Canada.
Well, at home we just call it the Accord. It's just called the Accord. When I was Minister of Indigenous Services, stepping outside of my role, but in my role as Regional Minister for Newfoundland and Labrador, we were able to find an additional $2.5 billion using the levers of the Accord for our province's, our provincial government, our province's economy. That's astounding, as I know you know, Ms. Jones, but that's a lot of money for us. And it provided, because it was recurring funding over a number of years, it was actually something that positively affected the credit rating of the province almost immediately, saving additional hundreds of millions of dollars. It's what it did at the time, at such a pivotal time in our history, was it gave us control of our destiny. I mean, there is nothing that we can do with the Atlantic Accord federally without it being mirrored provincially, and similarly, legislation provincially must be mirrored federally. We have to agree on these things together. There's no getting around it. And that sort of autonomy, it gave us such a sense of pride at the time, a sense of prosperity. Some people have called the Atlantic Accord our document of prosperity. And so what it does and what it has done in my lifetime is it created an industry that we are so proud of, that we export our talent and our people all around the world. I sit on a plane more often than not, many of you know. I mean, on flights from St. John's to Toronto, and the guy next to me is going to Mongolia, and he's 29 years old because of the things he knows and the things he's learned. This is not something I thought we were capable of doing. Nobody thought we were capable of doing 30 years ago. We are some of the best in the world at it. You provide a form of stability and investment that provides training and benefits for a province. You allow them control, you attract investment. If we would have to reproduce something, we'd have to come up with some new government entity or body in order to embrace the billions of dollars and thousands of jobs that this is the capability of doing. Why would we do that? This works perfectly well. It has been proven, and people believe in it. More importantly, the investment community believes in it. Actually, more importantly than that, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians believe in it.
Absolutely, they do. And we know it's about jobs, it's about labor, it's about Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia really owning the royalties that they create on offshore energy projects. But we also know that it's being done in a supportive way with others who use the ocean. It has been raised here in terms of the interaction with the fishing industry. We've developed offshore oil and gas in a great partnership with the fishing industry in Newfoundland and Labrador. And now we're looking to do so with offshore wind as well. Can you inform the committee what consultations or engagements that have taken place with the fisheries and ocean sector within the provinces?
CNLOPB, now I think will be the CNOEPB, just incorporate all forms of energy that now we realize are off our shores. They've had mechanisms like One Ocean, for instance, that deal directly with the FFAW and with Fisher to make sure there's no overlap. I mean, it's not always perfect, but people come to an agreement at the end of the day. We have a structure and an environment in which everyone get along and everybody can make money, and at the same time, I think, value these important resources that exist off our shores. I mean, in Newfoundland and Labrador, we are all too aware of the fragility of our fishery. We got to make sure that they can all coexist. We have allowed them to coexist over the tenure of this offshore industry that has blossomed over the past 3 decades. We're some of the best at it. We'll continue to do it.
I'll make a short question in 30 seconds, but I want to focus on the jobs and the economic value for Atlantic Canada. There's been so many skilled labor forces and trades developed across these provinces. We know that they're out there looking for new developments and new initiatives. Can you tell us what the impact on the jobs and the economy would be in Atlantic Canada?
I'll have a much better idea of what the impact will be as soon as we can get this legislation passed, because that's what investment is waiting on. Let's not dilly-dally with this. We have got billions of dollars in the offing. We know around the world where investment money is going. I mean, AIMCO in Alberta just announced this new billion-dollar fund, but they also added that they've been investing in renewables and energy transition, their language, for, pretty much the past 10 years. Let's not miss out on this.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Thank you, Minister. We will now proceed to Monsieur Simard for 6 minutes from the Bloc Québécois. The floor is yours, Monsieur Simard.
Merci, Georges. Merci.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to see you here, Mr. Regan, Minister of Natural Resources in 2019 when I first came in. So good to see you again. And you've said something that certainly struck me in your opening statement. You said that oil and gas saved your province. The problem is that today, we have to save the planet from oil and gas, which leads us to the transition. To my mind, the transition is a simple matter. It's about going from high greenhouse gas energy sources to those that are far greener. And unfortunately, I have the impression that most of your government's interventions are focused on supporting the oil and gas sector, the petroleum sector. And you'll understand where I'm getting at. There is a transition that's needed. Perhaps you don't like the idea of a just transition in its totality, but we do need to work with the people of Canada, with the workers, and I'm concerned that we aren't moving fast enough to leave behind the world of petroleum. So it's unusual to hear you say that petroleum has saved your province. I take that seriously. And when you saw the Chancellor of Germany arriving in your provinces and in your province and Siemens CEOs and so on, and I've had a chance to meet these people, the Siemens people from Germany, and they have told us that the very idea of creating blue hydrogen, meaning from gas, is not something they can really consider, given that the technological risks are too high, and it would be much too expensive to be able to do this on a good business basis. And I'm sharing this because, of course, I certainly hope that the Newfoundland people, the people of your province, get through this well, and if there's a wind sector to their solutions, all the better. But look, we've got a competition between clean energy and other types of energy, and you're not playing your role as a proper judge of these matters in the current government. Keeping in mind, for example, the pipeline, $30 billion. So, interventions that would take some courage on your part, that are being privileged by other countries, I have the impression that we're not doing it. You're not doing it. Now, I certainly stand for the provinces, and if there's no contradiction, if the people of Newfoundland would like this project, why would I be against it? I would be very concerned if an MP from Newfoundland would come in and say, regarding an agreement, an accord between Canada and Quebec, something nefarious. But what I am worried about is that this, again, is a bill which intends to support the petroleum sector. Evidence? Well, it's still possible under this new bill to authorize new export projects for petroleum. So, to my mind, this project does not include the courageous choice of truly moving to low-carbon energy sources. The aim of wind energy, if I understand correctly, is to create blue hydrogen. But hydrogen permits would also be granted to petroleum sector businesses trying to create hydrogen as well. So I think that we're really not getting to what's necessary here. You're trying to remove the word petroleum from the agreement. It's a little bit of greenwashing, I think. And most of the accord really still applies to petroleum. I'm not sure if you agree. I was a little long with that. Sorry about that. Thank you for the question, Mr. Simard.
It is not going to be easy. It's going to be messy. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging, and it could be incredibly, incredibly prosperous for the people of my province, for the people of the country as a whole, if we get it right. Abrupt stops and starts to whole industries, especially whether, I know a lot of people in some parts of this country don't appreciate this. In Newfoundland and Labrador, in Saskatchewan and Alberta, we appreciate this. We are the 4th biggest producers of oil in the world. We are the 5th producers of gas. That is big. There is no getting to net zero or transitions without those 3 provinces. It isn't going to happen. And every part of the country benefits from that prosperity. But having said that, I often say in my part of the country, in Newfoundland and Labrador, we can't really afford ideology. We don't let that get in the way. Stare opportunity squarely in the face. This is about jobs and money. Jobs and money. These are opportunities from investors that are coming, knocking on our door. German chancellors landing their planes, telling us we are the place they want to invest for green hydrogen. Great. And I tell you who I find incredibly brave. Don't look necessarily to the politicians. Look to the workers of my province. There is a community in Newfoundland called Argentia. And if you stand there and you look at it, they are building a gravity-based structure for the West White Rose project. This thing reaches right up to the sky, and this was built by men and women using cement driven in wheelbarrows to go to the top of this thing and build it. It is a gravity-based structure for an offshore oil rig. Right next to it, they are building the biggest monopile marshalling port on the eastern seaboard, putting together wind turbines for the entire eastern seaboard. That's a transition. That is staying out of the way of investment, but allowing workers to do the work that they do. And the same workers and the same unions that are building one are also building the other. And this is how it happens. It happens before your eyes. It is not a big stop one and start the other. It is going to take time. I agree with you, Mr. Simard, though. We need to get faster at it. There's no question. But I tell you what, this unnecessary obstruction of legislation that would attract that renewable investment ain't helping things much. We need to get busy.
Thank you. On that note, thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Simard. Thank you, Minister, for your response. And we'll now go to Mr. Angus from the New Democratic Party for 6 minutes. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Minister. I think I just want to set the record straight. Would it be fair to say you and I have had our scraps over the years? Yes. So if I do interrupt you because you're full of flight and fancy right now, it's only because I do have a bunch of questions. But that being said, I think what really concerns me is that we have a window, and that window is going to pass us by if we don't move. Since Biden moved on the IRA, $500 billion in new investments. What they said that they would get for solar capacity 3 years ago, they're twice that now. what they said they would get for wind, they're 43% more. So I guess I'm dumbfounded that I'm sitting here at a committee where my Conservative colleagues are going to vote against jobs in Newfoundland and Labrador just out of spite. We have an opportunity. Those projects are going in the United States. They're construction jobs, they're long-term jobs, they're jobs for the communities. How is it possible that we could sit on the sidelines and let that opportunity go to the United States or China or Europe and leave us in the dirt?
Mr. Angus, look, I would just say to you, as I've said to members of this committee already, if we didn't have the Atlantic Accord and the CNLO PB, we'd have to invent it, and that would just take time. Plus, it would have to take the time to build up a reputation as being a safe place for investors to go to. We've got that. I mean, one of the things that really strikes me, and I think about our nuclear industry when I was Minister of Natural Resources, one of our greatest advantages, and another thing which is extremely competitive, the nuclear industry, is our regulatory regime. It's one of the best in the world. Investors know it and trust it. People know it contributes to safe and clean forms of energy. We cannot let that squander. We cannot whittle that away. You are absolutely right. I mean, when I was Minister of Natural Resources, the Secretary of Energy, Dan Brouillette, who I got along with very well, but, the Trump administration was not exactly favorable to these things. And it has been a 180 that has happened. And I can tell you, ultimately, people will follow the money. Renewables have only plummeted in cost, and profits will only rise.
Thank you. I guess the issue of certainty, I mean, investors are not going to come to a place where the message is if you're clean and alternative energy, we're going to block development. And this is my concern. I see Andrew Fleury, the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, who I've not personally met. But he says the significance of these amendments to the Atlantic Accord cannot be understated. This will echo loudly now and be heard for years and years to come. Much like the original accord, we can take stewardship of our natural resources. The winds of change are upon us. Today, we start a new frontier for future generations. This is a gigantic win for Newfoundland and Labrador. My good friend, the member for Costa Bay Central Notre Dame, kind of presented the Premier of Newfoundland as some kind of poor rube at a country fair. He said that you guys had hoodwinked him and you pulled the wool over his eye. So could you give me the truth here? On this clean energy project, on jobs in Newfoundland and Labrador, are the Conservatives right? Did you take this poor guy out of Newfoundland and Labrador and walk him around the back and take his wallet? Or is he speaking up about the jobs that we need? I need an answer on this.
Andrew Fleury is a trauma surgeon trained at Johns Hopkins University. I don't think it would be me or anybody else, I think Ms. Jones can agree, who are going to hoodwink Andrew Fleury. Look, he's listening to investors. And look, I got to plead with members of this committee. Not only, are we providing unnecessary obstruction, but also in the things that we say. I mean, to have the CEO of Everwind come out and say that he sincerely regrets and was really taken aback by offensive remarks where he was misquoted around this committee. This is somebody who's looking at spending billions of dollars in Nova Scotia and potentially Newfoundland and Labrador as well. Please, just let this money flow and jobs be created in this incredibly important industry. This transition that people talk about, it's happening because the money's going that way. And when the money goes that way, jobs follow, and usually smart politicians follow.
Well, I want to raise that question because my good friend from Cumberland Colchester, who's been elected, 2 years, he was pretty emphatic. He said everybody knows there's no financial case for hydrogen. And that's why he's going to vote against jobs in Nova Scotia. No case for hydrogen. And I was looking up the numbers. It said $320 billion. So I met Chancellor Schultz in Germany. He seemed to think Canada had a hydrogen potential. So is the member for Cumberland Colchester, does he got that area of expertise that's sort of, again, hoodwinking the poor Premier of Nova Scotia who said he wants this? Is there any case for hydrogen, or is this some kind of big woke conspiracy that we're dealing with here?
Mr. Angus, even more than the Chancellor of Germany, I would say trust the people who are willing to put down the money, the billions. Like, follow investors. Follow the money. And the money is leading to these resources. Who are we to get in the way so long as they are following the right regulatory framework that we put in place to make sure that we find a balance with the environment and all the other stuff that I think we can all agree on? I mean,
Well,
there's
we have to.
nuances.
I mean, we scrap all the time, but this is about jobs. This is about whether Canada has a place or not. And the Conservatives are adamant. They are not going to let this thing pass. What is it going to mean for investors if they're looking at Canada as this dead-end road when Europe's putting the money in, China's putting the money in, the United States is putting the money in, Germany's looking for that hydrogen? Are we going to be able to stand up and deliver that product to Germany?
This is an instance where, let's step out of the way and let the market happen. Let investment flow. If they want it to bring it here, who are we to get in the way? And we have a regulatory structure that has worked for our offshore oil and gas from its inception to its maturity right now. It continues to prosper. I mean, I look at West White Rose and looking at that gravity-based structure being built. It continues to happen. Investment continues to flow. But more money now is going to lowering emissions and building up renewables. What an amazing thing that is, Mr. Angus. I think you can agree in your tenure in Parliament that suddenly all the money's going that way. That's incredible. And other places are diversifying, including AIMCO in Edmonton.
Thank you, Mr. Angus, for your questions, and Minister for your detailed response. We'll now go to our next round of 5 minutes, and we'll start with Mr. Small from the Conservative Party. Mr. Small, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Minister O'Regan for coming today and the officials to this important discussion and debate about this bill. Minister, I just heard you reference the investment flowing in into our offshore. In 2015, bids for exploration parcels were over $1 billion. After 8 years, that's dropped to 0 last year.
Following the introduction of C-49.
Yeah, exactly. So Bill C-49 was introduced in May. After that, anyone that was building a bid stopped. They pulled the resources away. So there was $0 that flowed in to our offshore in bidding up parcels for exploration. At the same time, in the Gulf of Mexico, bids were almost $400 million, and exploration companies were tripping over each other while they're walking away from ourselves. So do you agree with industry stakeholders that the uncertainty introduced by the unconstitutional Bill C-69 and now the amendments that you propose to the Atlantic Accord might be a little bit responsible for that investment walking away from Newfoundland and Labrador?
Who are the industry stakeholders?
The oil and gas companies that explore.
I know them.
Yeah, you know them.
Yeah.
And you know they didn't put any bids in this year.
Mr. Small, are you making a correlation between a lack of investment in the oil and gas industry and proposed legislation that really has, as I would argue, only extends the stability that the oil and gas industry has enjoyed over the past number of decades? Are you saying I don't see the relationship other than timing?
Okay, Minister O'Regan, I'll read you a little clause from your bill, from your amendments here. The Governor and Council may, for the purpose of the protection of the environment, make regulations prohibiting in respect of any portion of the offshore area that is specified in these regulations and is, or in the opinion of the Governor and Council, may be identified under an Act of Parliament or of the legislature of the province as an area of environmental or marine conservation or protection. Okay, so they can stop the commencement or continuation of any work or activity relating to the exploration or drilling for the production, conservation, processing, or transportation of petroleum or an offshore renewable energy project. So what can you say with beyond a reason of a doubt that a clause like that would not give a tinge of uncertainty to investors who want to come and explore? Or would they go somewhere else like the young fellow from Angola that was on the plane with you?
I think he was actually from Trinity, but he was going to Mongolia. But I hear your point. Look, there is nothing that can happen in the Atlantic Accord legislation without it being mirrored legislatively by the province of Newfoundland and Labrador to the letter. There is nothing that can happen to the industry without the province's approval. That has always been the way of the Accord, and that is probably singularly its greatest achievement. And it will continue to provide us that stability. It will continue to provide us that flexibility as well. I cannot speak to investors' decisions on oil and gas. I can tell you that oil and gas off our shores is certainly is a capital-intensive endeavor. I mean, anybody who has stared at Hebron or currently stares at West White Rose knows it is a lot of money. Gulf oil is much, much cheaper.
Okay.
But one thing that you cannot question is the greater stability and certainty you provide investors, the greater investment you will realize. The more that we disparage investors around this table and unnecessarily obstruct this legislation, far greater chances that we're going to be looking after a lot more uncertainty than that.
So these investors want certainty.
Indeed.
If you're an investor, you'd want certainty.
Indeed.
If that was your own money, and you're going to put that somewhere, and there's a shadow of a doubt that you're wasting that money, and you could go to a friendlier jurisdiction, and you know that your investment is not in jeopardy, and that the goalposts aren't going to be moved, where would you go?
The alternative is what? That we would create an entirely new construct to attract investment in this burgeoning field, and then we would have to take the time for it to gain the reputation amongst investors.
The oil and gas industry off Newfoundland and Labrador is not something new. This is something that's prospered.
Mr. Small, what we are proposing are very new industries, and we are saying extend the same stability that was afforded to offshore oil to renewables, so people know and understand that the rules will not change.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Small. Thank you, Minister Regan, for that. We'll now move to the next round, or the next set of questions from Mr. Sorbara for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will split my time with my colleague Daryl Sampson from the wonderful province of Nova Scotia in about 2.5 minutes. Welcome, Minister. It's nice to have you here today with us. First off, I'd like to start off and just say quickly, I have been able to read over the release today on you're the chair of the Ministerial Working Group on regulatory efficiency for clean growth projects in the statement. So I do welcome that statement today. I think there's a lot of good things that you folks are doing on that cabinet committee to ensure that Canada is positioned to take advantage of and leverage our strengths in this clean growth future that we are moving into. Before turning it over to Mr. Sampson, I do have one question. When you look at a portfolio, or when you look at energy sources, when you are looking in that vein, you talk about diversity. You want to diversify your portfolio, you want to diversify your energy sources. And the way I think about offshore wind or offshore energy, depending on the term you want to use, it's being able to diversify the energy sources that the wonderful provinces of Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia, in these two cases, can generate and provide extra energy, extra funds, drive investment, and what I like to say is create wealth and create jobs. And I think that's what we're talking about today, and I think that's why we have the support of the premiers of both those beautiful provinces, and I think that's where we're going. Isn't that really what this conversation on C-49 is about?
Yeah, it's about diversity, it's about money, it's about jobs. I mean, that's what the offshore has brought to us. And the technical expertise that, and thank goodness, in this instance, is transferable to these new jobs. In other words, the same labor force that did one does the other. As I said, stand there in Argentia, Newfoundland, and it's happening there right in front of you. Workers are behind this, unions are behind this, because this is about jobs and money. And it has been a blessing to my province. But, the world is changing, investors change, things move, money moves, and you're seeing greater diversity in many energy portfolios. Again, looking at the news today and seeing AIMCO in Edmonton taking $1 billion of their money and putting it towards energy transition, in their words, and global energy transition. So I presume that they're making investments around the world in these fields and in renewables. So, they're diversifying. Right? And we continue to look at ways to diversify because that's what investors want. At one point, it was perhaps, just the leaders, environmental groups, just governments perhaps, but now it's investors. And that is a tide that will be very difficult to turn for any one of us. But it's one that we shouldn't be trying to turn anyway. It's one that we should embrace. I mean, I just think that this is such a pivotal moment. And having been Minister of Natural Resources, now years later standing before this committee, the level of investment and interest in these, the potential for this country is just massive. We embraced these industries before. We embraced oil and gas before. And look how good we got at it. Now we can take that same prowess, that same expertise, that same ability, and put it towards something that is new, where investors in those same industries are starting to put their money. I mean, the opportunity is golden.
I agree, and with that, thank you, Minister. I'll turn the remainder of my time over to MP Sampson.
Thank you, Minister, for being here today with us and your staff. This is an extremely important topic for all Atlantic Canadians, extremely important topic for Newfoundlanders and Nova Scotians. I'd like to read to you a quote from, because during debate in October in the fall, Premier Houston, Conservative Premier from Nova Scotia, sent a quote, and his quote was, "Bill C-49 is a necessary first step in unlocking our energy potential. There will be many other steps along the way, but we are hopeful that Bill C-49 will pass." And then just about less than an hour ago, so obviously he's very concerned about where we're going with this. Mr. Houston says, "We believe in the potential for green hydrogen and clean energy in our province. This will mean good-paying jobs for Nova Scotians and for the world." Mr. Could you share your comments on that? Why do you think Poilievre and his party are against creating great jobs for Nova Scotian and Atlantic Canadians? What is the issue?
We, Mr. Sampson, we have a point of order from Mr. Patzer, and the Minister, I'll ask you to hold until we deal with this point of order. Go ahead, Mr. Patzer.
Yeah, the member opposite knows that that is not true. Conservatives obviously support the creation of good jobs all across the entire country, especially in Newfoundland and Labrador, and however the provinces want to do that, we support that.
Thank you for your, Mr. Patzer, for your engagement, but that's not a point of order of relevancy to a procedural issue. So,
and they voted against it in the House.
I will ask Mr. O'Regan briefly to respond to that question, as you got about 15 seconds.
Provinces, you know, when the great victory of the Atlantic Accord was the federal government recognized that Newfoundland and Labrador should prosper from its offshore oil and gas, Nova Scotia as well, in the same way that Alberta and Saskatchewan do, because theirs is on land. So these premiers aren't just, we're not just looking for their support. They are very much in charge here. We can't do anything without them and them with us. We have to do it together in concert, right? So this is more than just support. This is us getting in the way of two premiers and two provinces that are intent on more money and jobs for their provinces. Think about that.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. We will move to our next round for 2.5 minutes, and to Monsieur Simard for 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Merci.
Thank you. Let me go back to the discussion we were having earlier. I would like to underscore that I fully understand your wish to defend jobs in your province, and that's something we should certainly congratulate you on. It's what anyone would do. And I certainly respect the fields of jurisdiction and the jurisdictions of each province. But there is an issue with this bill that I've tried to explain to you, the matter of a correct and full transition. But I have another simple question for you. Do you agree that in a near future, we will need to leave the petroleum industry behind in Canada? And I'd like a short answer.
With us for some time. It's just a matter of whether or not we burn it or not, right? I mean, whether it's plastics or healthcare supplies, or this is a huge industry. Oil and gas is going to be with us for quite some time. What we need to get rid of and we need to be laser focused on are emissions.
OK. Ah bon, c'est intéressant.
Oh, all right. That's an interesting answer. So Canada will remain stuck in the straitjacket that it's in, if I understand you correctly, in oil and gas and petroleum for some time. That's what you're telling me?
No.
Mais c'est ce que je vais vous demander. Est-ce que vous croyez?
All right. So I'm asking, do you think that Canada will remain, all said and done, a country whose economy is largely based on oil and gas? Do you think that's going to be the case?
Do what the world is asking us to do, what investors are asking us to do, and what we need to do for the sake of the planet is we need to cut emissions. We need to cut emissions wherever and whenever we can find them. The good news is that the money is now on doing that, which is extraordinary news, because we need a massive amount of investment, not only in this country, but around the world in order to do that. It is emissions that's polluting our air and heating up our planet. It is emissions that we need to cut.
Merci. Mais je vais vous dire, Monsieur.
Thank you. All right, but let me say, Mr. O'Regan, that when you say that, that sort of statement reminds me of what the large petroleum companies say, the oil and gas companies, who would like to have us believe that it's fully possible that technologically, in the immediate future, we will have oil and gas that's not greenhouse gas producing. I tell those sorts of people that this is just imaginary. These are resources that are being wasted. We could use these funds to develop new clean energy sources. We are one of the countries that is investing least in clean energy, and there are a number of analyses that show this. To my mind, saying that oil and gas isn't high greenhouse gas intensive is like saying that it just makes absolutely no sense. It's like saying that poutine, you can eat poutine, but you're no calories in it. Same thing for oil and gas. There'll be no such thing as oil and gas that's a low greenhouse gas emitting.
Désolé. Bon.
And I do want to give the minister.
Je reviendrai avec ma recette de poutine après.
Minister, I want to give you the opportunity for a very quick response.
Mr. Simon, understood. Look, if I could just say one thing to repeat to this committee, let the market play out. The market is playing out. Renewables, solar, wind, the cost for them is plummeting, and you are seeing energy companies all over the world that are diversifying into these places because there is more money to be made. And listen, I'm not one to, say that that's a bad thing. That is a good thing because it will drive investment. This transition is happening because the market is fueling it. That is what has happened just in the past few short years. And if I can say anything to this committee, it is please let the market do what it is doing.
Thank you, Minister. We will now go to Mr. Angus for 2.5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Conservatives point out the fact that the investment dollars for oil and gas exploration are drying up, which is very much what we're seeing in the International Energy Agency saying there's a major shift underway. So we have the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador saying they want to take advantage of what jobs can be created with alternate energy. And the Conservatives said, he's not too bright, he's been hoodwinked, he's, pulled the wool over his eyes. And they said they're going to stop this.
We have a point of order from Mr. Small. Mr. Small, go ahead on your point of order.
Mr. Chair, I take great offense to Mr. Angus's comment. I made no reference to any Premier's intelligence or level of intelligence, and I would like for him to withdraw that remark. Thank you.
Colleagues, I would ask that we focus on the study at hand today, and whatever on the point of order. If a statement's been made, I think the member can have an opportunity to clarify it when he has the opportunity to speak. But we do stay relevant to the conversation we're having, and make sure that we're not making accusations that are unfounded against others, and use your time to question the minister.
Absolutely.
But I would ask Mr. Angus to go ahead.
How did you hoodwink the provinces? How did you pull the wool over their eyes? That would suggest a very dismal view of the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, but he's had the same attitude for the Premier of Nova Scotia. So the Conservatives are going to vote against the premiers in Nova Scotia and Labrador because they're trying to get clean energy projects. I guess I'm thinking back to 2007. Remember Stephen Harper, how he went after Atlantic Canada on the Atlantic Accord? Remember the great Bill Casey? Now, there was a Conservative, and Danny Williams stood up. So I just want to get my head around the idea that Pierre Poilievre has decided that unless Newfoundland and Labrador are willing to go down with the ship on big oil, that they are going to stop Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia from moving ahead on economic development. That Pierre Poilievre has instructed his people to come in, ridicule the premiers, and say he's going to stop this from going forward. Have we seen anything like this since Stephen Harper decided to pick his fight with Danny Williams? And we know how well that went down for the Conservatives. They're still picking up the pieces.
I'm not going to make assumptions on motivation. I will say this, though, and this is really at the heart of the Atlantic Accord. Provincial autonomy which is so incredibly important when it comes to natural resource development, that those closest to the resource have control over that resource, that those closest to the resource benefit from that resource. That is something that has helped to build this country. I would say it is encapsulated and enshrined in the Atlantic Accord. It means so much to our province as a result. It gives us a sense of autonomy and direction and control. And the other thing is to provide the stability and certainty to draw the investment that we have proven to draw over the past 3 decades. And we will continue to do in this really exciting and new industry where the money is going. Follow the money.
Thank you, Minister. We are now going to go to Mr. Small, but Mr. Small, I'm going to ask you, you're going to have a shorter round of 3 minutes because the Minister does have a hard stop at 4:30. So you got 3 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Minister O'Regan, I just heard you talk about those close to the resource. So offshore wind, which is a wonderful thing, it uses all of our natural resources that we flourish on in Canada. But to the people close to the resource, the fishing industry is going to be competing with offshore wind. Someone close to the fishing industry, in fact, very, very close to the fishing industry, Katie Power texted me last night. Overall, the language from Liberals and their minister surrounding expediting and fast-tracking is enormously dismissive to the vocal and fierce opposition locally in Newfoundland. Don't agree with the minister's comments saying the province of Newfoundland and Labrador is comfortable with the pace and verbiage within the bill, particularly the fishing industry. So, did you consult with the fishing industry at all?
Yes, we did.
Did you consult with the FFAW? Because that's not what they're telling me.
Yes, we did.
You did?
Yes.
So we have
One Ocean, which is as Minister of Natural Resources, which is a mechanism I used in order to. It brings all parties around the table, so we can work out.
We're going to have them here anyways, and they'll be able to answer that same question. How about with the United Fisheries Conservation Alliance? Maritime Fisheries Alliance, Cape Breton Fish Harvesters Association, Guysborough County Inshore Fisheries Alliance. No, not ringing a bell. Seafood Producers Association of Nova Scotia. No. Coldwater Lobster Association. Brazil Rock Lobster Association. No. So the answer is no. And we heard about these vast consultations. These are competing geographical areas for these industries. Where's the consultation?
Mr. Small, I would think that you, being a member of Parliament for Newfoundland and Labrador, would know better than most that we have always found a way to get along. We have always found a way for these industries to coexist. We have mechanisms in place like One World, or One Ocean, that continue to work. Do things get perfect? No, but nor do they for farmers and oil producers out west.
So why would they come to me about the consultation process?
We sit down at the same table and we work these things out. But the overall framework that ensures the prosperity of our entire province,
I've met with
we
these
have
groups.
benefited from the Atlantic Accord for the past 30 years. We will continue to benefit as we begin new industries, and we will continue to talk to one another and work it out.
Will you guarantee a
have.
framework is built into this legislation so that these fishing industry stakeholders have a meaningful voice in the building
They
of
have a
offshore
meaningful
wind?
voice now for the oil and gas industry. They will continue to have a meaningful voice as we move into renewables. That will not change. That is one of the
That's not what they've been telling me.
One of the tenets of the Atlantic Accord.
Thank you, Minister and Mr. Small. I am going to give a quick question for 30 seconds question and an opportunity for the Minister to answer to Mr. Sampson. Sorry, Mr. Sampson, your time was taken away, but I am going to give you just a quick
Point of order.
Point of order.
What happened to the hard stop at 4:30?
Yeah.
We started a couple of minutes late, and just to be
minister told
fair,
you.
6 minutes late.
No, Chair, the conversation that you and I just had
Point of
privately
order.
off the mic was
Let's
that the
have the
minister has a
question.
hard stop at 4:30. That was fine. So you said Mr. Small
colleagues are
gets
stalling
truncated
so
amount.
that we
I
can
agree.
Speaker.
We're past 4:30.
colleagues,
I don't know
colleagues.
why there's suddenly a last minute.
order.
I'm not done.
Order.
I don't know
I'm
why
gonna
there's
ask-
suddenly a last
I'm gonna.
minute.
I gave Mr.
Suddenly
Small
the
got
minister
3
doesn't
minutes.
have
The
a hard
Liberal
stop.
time got cut from
I'm sure
5
that
to
he
9.
actually does, and now
And
suddenly there's an extra question.
I've
Yeah.
given Mr. Sampson 1 minute to ask a question. He can be under that time because of time.
Thank
The minister
you,
does have
This is
to.
Chair,
back to the
because
problem of you,
we
Chair,
started 5
with
minutes
your
late.
double standards.
Go ahead,
and
Go
rules
ahead.
for
Minister,
being not for-
I really, when it really hit a nerve when you said provincial autonomy, because the Conservative Party are always saying respect jurisdiction, but yet here they're not willing to do it. So is it again about Atlantic Canada? I'm not sure. So my question is very quick. C-49 is a great opportunity to support laborers in the maritime provinces, and, which is so important, will also move us closer to net zero. Why is the Conservative Party against that?
In my province, who I am so immensely proud of, an industry that I have seen born within my lifetime, and in your province as well, these workers that have taken on the world in energy will now move into this really exciting and amazing new challenge. They are the ones to do it. I plead with this committee, let the money flow, let the jobs be created. There is nothing bad to see here. We will have bumps along the road. We will have compromises we will need to make. But at least we can agree on this investment structure. More than that, at least we can agree to respect the autonomy of these provinces as they make their own way into the world, as they continue to build as they have built, realizing the full potential of these workers. We are able now to do things that can take on the world. Get out of the way.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your testimony today, and thank you for officials in joining you and giving us an extra minute or two of your time. Thank you. We will now suspend for 5 minutes to change panels.
Thanks.
This meeting back to order pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, October 17, 2023, and the adopted motion of Wednesday, December 13, 2023. The committee is resuming consideration of Bill C-49, an act to amend the Canada, Newfoundland, and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation Act and the Canada, Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts. In accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all remote participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. With us today for the second hour, we have the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Kathy Graham, Director General, Marine Planning and Conservation, Department of Transport, Isa Gros-Louis, Director General, Indigenous Relations and Navigation Protection. My apologies if I mispronounced your name. Joanna Manger, Director General, Marine Safety and Security by video conference. From the Department of Natural Resources, Abigail Lichsfeld, Senior Director, Renewable and Electrical Energy Division, Energy System Sector. Annette Tobin, Director, Offshore Management Division, Fuel Sector. Kathy Graham, the floor is yours for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So bonjour and good afternoon to committee members as well. So as mentioned, my name's Kathy Graham and I'm the Director General for Marine Planning and Conservation at Fisheries and Oceans Canada. And I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to appear before this committee on behalf of the department. So the Government of Canada has committed to increasing the conservation of marine and coastal areas to 25% by 2025 and 30% by 2030. This important 30 by 30 target is articulated in the Convention on Biological Diversity's Cumin-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was adopted during the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties in 2022. In 2023, at the 5th International Marine Protected Area Congress that Canada hosted, Canada announced important details for its Marine Protected Area Protection Standard, through which we plan to prohibit several industrial activities within the boundaries of new federal marine protected areas, including exploration, development, and production of oil and gas resources. Fisheries and Oceans Canada, together with Environment and Climate Change Canada and Parks Canada, are responsible for implementing the Marine Protected Area Protection Standards with the support of other federal regulators such as Natural Resources Canada, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, and Transport Canada. This bill serves to reinforce the joint management framework with the provinces and offshore accord areas. Further, this bill supports implementation of the protection standards in new federal sites to be established in the Canada-Nova Scotia and Canada-Newfoundland Labrador offshore accord areas by harmonizing marine protected area laws and accord acts. Amendments would provide the authority for the Governing Council, with the provincial minister's approval, to prohibit the commencement or continuation of oil and gas activities and prohibit the issuance of new interests in areas identified for conservation. The amendments would also enable the negotiation and removal of existing oil and gas interests with compensation in these areas identified for conservation. Fisheries and Ocean Canada uses two main types of marine conservation tools to protect marine ecosystems. We use the Oceans Act to establish marine protected areas. We use the Fisheries Act to create fisheries areas closures, which can then be recognized as other effective area-based conservation measures, or we commonly refer to them as OECMs, if they meet the criteria set out in the Government of Canada's Marine OECM guidance. Areas recognized in this way are referred to as marine refuges. We rely on Natural Resources Canada to provide assessments of the petroleum resources in candidate areas for protection and to help us resolve any issues of concern that may arise as they relate to oil and gas. We work closely and collaborative with our federal, provincial, and territorial colleagues and Indigenous partners throughout the protected area establishment processes and use best available knowledge to inform our processes, including scientific, Indigenous, and local knowledge. We engage and consult extensively with stakeholders across a wide range of industries, from the time an area is identified for conservation to when the area is established as a marine protected area or recognized as a marine refuge. We also seek to minimize socioeconomic impacts while achieving conservation objectives for each of our sites. Bill C-49 would make the application of the Marine Protection Area Protection Standard more consistent across all of Canada's marine spaces. Fisheries and Oceans Canada is committed to working with provinces and territories, Indigenous peoples, and industry stakeholders to meet the objective of conserving 30% of Canada's marine and coastal areas by 2030. We will continue to work closely with Natural Resources Canada and the relevant provinces in all aspects of the Marine Protected Area establishment process to ensure that the co-management regime and the provisions of the Accord Acts are fully respected. Thank you. I welcome any questions, Chair.
Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now go to Joanna Manger for 5 minutes, an opening statement. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair and committee members, for inviting us to speak to Transport Canada's mandate with respect to Bill C-49. My name is Joanna Manger, and I'm the Director General of Marine Safety and Security. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you remotely today from Montreal, and would like to acknowledge with respect that I'm appearing from the traditional and unceded territory of the Kanakahaka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations. As the lead department for all transportation issues, policies, and programs that promote safe, secure, efficient, and environmentally responsible transportation, Transport Canada recognizes the value of offshore renewable energy projects for the Canadian economy and in the transition towards a net zero economy. I am joined by my colleague, Issa Cole-Louis, the Director General of Indigenous Relations and the Navigation Protection Program, to speak about Transport Canada's role and responsibilities regarding navigation protection in relation to renewable energy projects like those envisioned in Bill C-49. Transport Canada administre plusieurs lois.
Transport Canada administers a number of laws, including the legislation on navigable waters for Canada and the legislation regarding merchant marine shipping, with a complete regulatory regime to support the use of our potential to create offshore resources, while nevertheless attenuating the impacts on the public right to navigation, ensuring the security of navigation and the safety of navigators and passengers on ships. Transport Canada does not foresee any effect of this legislation on the changes in C-49.
Waters Act enables Transport Canada to take actions that protect the public right to navigate on all Canadian navigable waters by regulating structures, devices, or things known as works under the Act that are built or placed in Canadian waters, meeting the internal waters and the territorial sea of Canada, which generally extends up to 12 nautical miles from the coast. This means that offshore renewable energy projects proposed within Canadian waters would require proponents to apply for an approval under the Canadian Navigable Waters Act to build any works. This allows Transport Canada to assess impacts to navigation so that we may mitigate them. Generally speaking, these mitigation measures involve lighting or marking requirements to ensure these works are visible to navigators in the area to promote the safety of vessels and of the works. Such mitigation measures are normally included as conditions in an approval. This Canadian Navigable Waters Act would, however, not apply to offshore renewable energy projects that would be proposed in the economic exclusive zone of Canada, as these are outside the mandate of our legislation. Le Programme de Sécurité et de Sûreté.
The Transport Canada's Marine Safety Program implements policies and regulations under the 2001 legislation on merchant marine shipping in Canada to promote and ensure the safety of the use and the navigation of vessels, and to protect lives and goods, and also prevent pollution caused by vessels. Among the regulations that apply to navigation in the current context, I mentioned that on pollution, the pollution from vessels and dangerous chemical products, the regulations on vessel safety, on the construction and the equipment of vessels, and the regulation on maritime personnel.
Canada, the Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board, and the Canada, Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Board have a long history of cooperation when it comes to the safety of offshore operations. Generally speaking, the Canada Shipping Act 2001 and its regulations apply to all vessels while in transit to any offshore facilities. Once on site, vessels directly engaged in offshore drilling and production activities or only subject to regulations implemented by the relevant offshore board. Any vessels not directly engaged in offshore drilling activities fall under the Canada Shipping Act 2001 and regulations implemented by the relevant board. Navigational safety around offshore structures outside the 12 nautical mile limit would fall under the authority of the Canada Shipping Act 2001 and regulations such as the navigational safety regulations. The exact nature of measures taken will depend on the scale and scope of the project undertaken and determined after a collaborative process involving the proponent, Natural Resources Canada, the offshore boards, and other stakeholders. Transport Canada will continue to collaborate with Natural Resources Canada, other federal departments, other jurisdictions, industry, and Indigenous peoples to ensure that current and future transportation legislation and regulations continue to protect the safety of navigators and their right to navigate while allowing Canadians to benefit from the advancement of offshore renewable energy projects. I look forward to answering your questions. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you for your opening statement. We will now proceed to our first round of questions with Mr. Jeremy Patzer from the Conservative Party of Canada for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Patzer.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses, officials for being here. I guess just right off the top, doesn't really matter to me which one of you answers it. Mrs. Graham, this might maybe be easiest for you, but what is the current percentage of MPAs in Canada?
14.66% of Canada's marine space that is currently protected.
Okay, so it's 14.66%. The goal is 25 by 25 and then 30 by 30. Do we have a proposed map already for what that 25 by 25 is going to look like? Does that exist?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chair. We published it in February of 2023. There's 17 areas of interest that we're working on with our partners. I'm happy to make that available to the member.
Thank you. So when we look at the regulations of the Act, the way that it's drafted up, as far as allowing the minister to on a project that is located in an area or, in the opinion of the Governor Council, may be identified under the Act, we're looking at uncertainty for investors here. That's the number one issue, and now it's been verified by the fact there were 0 bids. Who advocated for that clause? Who asked for that clause to be on prohibitions and the right of the minister to cancel a project based on what may potentially be an area? Whose idea was that?
I can't speak to whose idea it was, member, but what I would say is that the actual amendments being proposed for the Accord Acts are generally meant to harmonize existing MPA laws with the Accord Act offshore areas to ensure that the joint oil and gas management framework that we currently have in place with Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and Labrador is genuinely fully respected.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Lixfield, Ms. Lixfeld, do you know offhand? Does anybody in industry have they come to the department and said, "Hey, this is something that we need"? Like, are any of these, because especially as it now applies to the decisions related to offshore renewable energy, right? So, just wanting to know, is that something that a private sector proponent has come to the government, to the department, and said, "Hey, we want this regulation written in"?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. We've been working for quite some time on these Accord Act amendments, so I can speak to like the policy rationale and who we heard from and what we're ultimately driving for in these proposed amendments. So it had been long recognized that there was a gap or there was a lack of tools within the Accord Act, so within this space for both levels of government to use when it came to marine conservation. So, in other words, the ability for the Accord ministers to prohibit activities in the Accord areas for the purposes of marine conservation or to cancel a license for the purposes of marine conservation just didn't exist. The Accord Acts were written at a time before marine conservation was a thing. And so these provisions are new tools. They're consistent with new tools that were brought under the Canada Petroleum Resources Act in 2018 and are really intended not to make the decision to establish MPAs across the country, but rather to provide the tool within the Accord Act for that decision to be taken around prohibition.
Okay,
and
can I, sorry, I only got limited time. I don't mean to cut you off,
sorry.
but do you know, is there any other jurisdictions around the world that have that same ability afforded to a politician?
I don't know off the top, no. I don't know. I'd have to come back to you. It certainly wasn't seen as something that was unique that we were looking to do here. It was really in the spirit of having that decision making within the accords themselves and not an absence of it.
Okay, because I think when we look at, again, the fact that there were 0 bids in 2023 after this bill was tabled, I think that really sets the precedent as to why people don't want to invest in Canada. I think it's easier for them to go. We heard from one of my colleagues earlier, over $400 million in bids went to the Gulf of Mexico, for example, right? Obviously, we all care about the environment. We all obviously care about species at risk or wildlife out in nature, and we want to continue to see the protection of those species. But when we have anti-development zones in a lot of senses here, if I could rebrand it that for a second, I think that's a huge part of the problem. And, you know, companies are going to take their investments and go to other jurisdictions with things like that. So as far as this last point here quickly, 40.1, it talks about when the minister needs to action as practicable after deciding to make a recommendation. Then there's 60 days for a ministerial decision, then an additional 30 days. But then it says no time limit. Who asked for no time limit to be given to the minister to be able to decide whether or not they're going to proceed with the project?
I'll just ask for a brief answer as time is up. So, but please provide a brief answer.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. That specific clause applies only to a decision whether or not to issue a call for bids. That is the only area to which that applies, and that is to enable the provincial and the federal minister to take the time that they need to come to a joint decision on authorizing the regulator to start a call for bids process.
Thank you. We'll now move over to Ms. Lapointe for 6 minutes. Ms. Lapointe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. So I understand that you engaged with Indigenous groups and organizations on this legislation, and we certainly expect to hear from Indigenous communities over the course of this study. Can you share with the committee what was the response of the Indigenous groups that you met with?
In developing the legislation, we did seek out many opportunities to engage Indigenous communities across Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Labrador, and other Atlantic communities. There was not a lot of uptake in our offers to engage, but we did have a number of meetings and conversations with communities. And through other avenues such as the regional assessment for offshore wind, which is currently underway, subsequent engagement activities with the regulators and through their bodies, such as the Fisheries Advisory Committee in Nova Scotia or One Ocean in Newfoundland and Labrador, there have been additional opportunities to engage. And once this new regime is in place and we are at the point of actually regulating activities throughout the entire land tenure, project development, construction phase, there are opportunities to engage Indigenous communities on specific projects. Anecdotally, we've also heard from a number of developers that are interested in developing offshore renewable energy projects in the Accord areas, and a number of them are engaging already with Indigenous communities, coastal communities and others, and are looking for opportunities to partner they're looking for opportunities to have Indigenous communities join their projects as partners.
I also want to ask you about the engagement that has occurred with the fishing sector to date, and what opportunities would there be for engagement with that sector in the future?
Similarly, we have had a number of conversations with fisheries groups, such as the Fisheries Advisory Council in Nova Scotia and One Ocean in Newfoundland and Labrador, specifically on the provisions of the bill. I've met with the Fisheries Advisory Committee, I think 3 times personally. Other members of my team have met them a number of additional times, and likewise with One Ocean. The regional assessments, as I mentioned, they are meeting extensively with fisheries stakeholders about the development of offshore renewables into the future. And again, throughout the development of specific projects, there will be opportunities to consult with a wide variety of stakeholders and interested groups on the development of projects.
Nova Scotia has announced that they intend to launch a call for bids for up to 5 gigawatts of offshore wind. Are the amendments put forward in this legislation required in order for that to proceed?
Yes, they are. Nova Scotia is interested, as you said, in seeing their offshore wind, their offshore industry expand into offshore renewables, and they have set a very ambitious goal of leasing up to 5 gigawatts by 2030 to meet domestic electricity and hydrogen and other needs. In order for them to build projects in the Accord areas, they do need Bill C-49 and these amendments to pass. The province does have a marine energy regime that they could use for projects located within provincial bays, but it would be very difficult for them to achieve a target of 5 gigawatts outside of the offshore.
Okay. And can you tell us what other initiatives the government is undertaking to support offshore wind industry and also the hydrogen industry?
We are certainly undertaking a fairly ambitious implementation plan in addition to the bill. In Budget 2023, the federal government did provide resources to undertake some additional data collection, environmental monitoring studies that we'll be launching in the Accord areas in both Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and Labrador. And there's also the regional assessments that are underway, which are an opportunity to engage quite widely with a variety of stakeholders on the development of this future industry.
Quickly, the amendments provide the regulators with the authority to have a participant funding program. When will this program be in place? How much money will be provided, and what opportunities do you see that there will be for the public and also for Indigenous groups to participate?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I'm supposed to address it this way, but of course it's indeed that is a proposed amendment here for the ability for the boards, for the regulators to institute a participant funding program that they don't currently explicitly have. The implementation of that in terms of the amount of money and how it will be dispersed, that's details that will follow. But we do know that it will provide the support that's needed to encourage and strengthen that engagement and consultation with Indigenous groups as well as with other stakeholders.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Monsieur Simard for 6 minutes.
Merci, merci.
Thank you. Quickly then, Ms. Lixfeld, I would like to understand how things work. Let's say that a proponent arrives with an offshore wind project and files their project. They're analyzed by the Department of Natural Resources, or are they analyzed by the province? How does this work? Thank you for your question.
Managed by the regulator. And so it is the regulator that launches a call for bids, and developers that are interested in building a renewable energy project would participate in the call for bids project. And that call for bids would outline the details of the intended project. And they would go through an authorization process, but all of that is managed specifically by the regulator.
Bon, dans le processus.
Very well. So in the bid process, if the proponent were to propose a financial framework, would the investment tax credits for clean electricity be integrated into, I suppose, their bid, and the tax credits for clean hydrogen as well? Or would there be a second analysis that would be carried out? And then who would manage that? Finances, you at Natural Resources? Would there be a second evaluation carried out to provide them with access to the tax credits? Thank you for the question.
Credits apply to expenses that are incurred. So it's actually a relationship between the developer and Revenue Canada, ostensibly. The details in terms of how those tax credits will apply, the types of expenditures, will enable a developer or a bidder in a process to evaluate their bid to determine, whether it's a cash bid, for example, or to estimate their project costs. They will be able to calculate the potential value of those tax credits in assessing the in designing their bid, but it is not part of the evaluation that the regulator would do in terms of assessing the bid.
Parfait.
Very well. I understand it's not the responsibility of the regulator. I'm asking because these tax credits, there's a limit on what they can be, I imagine. So I imagine there's a certain amount of competition between projects for clean hydrogen, clean energy. There are such projects outside of Newfoundland in other areas that aren't necessarily related to offshore wind energy. So, knowing that there are costs to these projects, and I can see some such projects, wind projects in my area of the world, they are quite costly. So how can we guarantee to any proponent interested in offshore wind energy access to the economic advantages associated with such projects? There's no guarantee, is there? Thank you for the question. In my opinion, this underscores just how important it is to move quickly to specify, to lay out how
Development of offshore renewables is in order to ensure that those early project developers will have the opportunity to benefit from all of the available incentives and measures that are in place.
Merci. Donc, merci.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether the following exists, but will there be directives provided from finances or natural resources, let's say, because I can imagine a hydrogen project with carbon capture and use and storage projects linked to it, and the cost would be higher than a hydrogen project, let's say, that would be linked to hydroelectricity. Let's just take that example. So would the carbon footprint be higher? I suppose it would. These are factors which are taken into consideration by the department when it comes to allotting funding or financial support, or is it just first come, first serve? Basically, I'd like to know whether there's already planning underway in your department or within finances to provide the sums to the most interesting projects. Unfortunately, the file is not in my portfolio, so I'm not really best placed to explain the development of and implementation of such tools. This would be a question for the Department of Finance. Okay, so I don't want to bother you with that. If you were an elected official, though, I would bother you nevertheless. So this is not in your backyard. But what is in your purview, I hope, is deciding what types of technology qualify for clean electricity or clean hydrogen. Yes, in a certain way of speaking, yes. All right. So does the department have any information about this, about the types of technology that will qualify as clean energy projects and clean hydrogen projects? Could you give us that information? I can check with my colleagues and provide you with what exists already. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Angus for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My Conservative colleagues seem to believe that a bill that would create jobs has scared away investment and shut down the oil and gas potential of Atlantic Canada just by announcing it. Ms. Lexfeld, off the coast of Nova Scotia, there hasn't been any oil and gas production, has there, since BP walked away from their projects?
I'll field that one. Thank you. That's right. There is no current gas production or oil production in Nova Scotia offshore. Sable was the last project there that was decommissioned in 2019.
Yeah, so before 2 elections ago, Big Oil walked off away from Nova Scotia, decided that there wasn't a future for them. But there was the one project off Sable Island. It was a $1.5 million bid from Incepcio Limited that came under intense public opposition and was just rejected last December, correct?
That's right.
Ms. Graham, were you involved in any of the reviews of the decision to stop the Sable Island proposal from going ahead? Was it because we know there was a lot of concern about that this was my colleagues refer to it as an anti-development zone, but the Sable Islands famous around the world for its fragile nature, and a lot of people in Nova Scotia really cared about it. Were you involved in any of you involved in the public response to this bid by oil?
I was not.
You were not?
So that is like a fundamental decision under the Accord Acts where both ministers approve or reject, and in that instance both ministers rejected. I'd be hazarding to guess in terms of what consultation, who they spoke to in arriving at that decision, but it was ministerial.
Yeah, I'm not going to put you trying to give us your own hypotheticals on this. What we do know is that oil proposal, $1.5 million bid, was deeply opposed by people across Nova Scotia because of the fragility of that land, and that the decision to kill that proposal was done by a provincial Conservative government working with the federal Liberal government. So that's how the Accord works, right? That they work together? Is that correct?
That's right. It was a joint decision.
Yeah.
So in instances of where there would be disagreement, there is the provincial veto for that. But in this case...
Could you repeat that? There's a provincial veto when they disagree?
Under the Accord Acts. Yeah.
Under the Accord Act.
Yeah.
So it was a Conservative premier who shut down the last oil project that could have gotten off the ground because of deep opposition. And if the federal government had tried to do that and the province was against it, there's a provincial veto. That's something my Conservative colleagues don't want to talk about, the power of the provincial veto. So they shut down oil and gas exploration. There is no oil and gas exploration, but there's now a potential to create a new clean energy market, and my Conservative colleagues want to shut that down because they want to have a federal veto of the Conservative leader over the people of Nova Scotia. That wouldn't be in keeping with the Accord as it stands.
Point
right?
of order, Chair. I mean, this isn't actually a point of order. I'll just admit that right off the.
Okay, well then you shouldn't be using it as a point of order.
I just have to say that like MP Angus is just making things up now.
You're correct, Ms. Stubbs. That is not a point of order, and we should not be using point of orders for debate opportunities or to cut other members off as they're speaking. So, Mr.
That is
Angus,
the sound
I will
of
come back to you.
The sound of a glass jaw cracking that I just heard. We are dealing
Point
with
of order, Chair.
this false claim.
Mr. Angus, I'll ask you to hold for a sec. We have a point of order from Mr. Patzer.
Yeah, I don't know why he has to default to the violent imagery here, but like, come on, like, as a chair, you know that we're not supposed to say things that are going to incite the committee, right? Elevate tensions. He's deliberately using inflammatory language. I would ask you to be judicious in making sure members don't do that. Maybe he forgets what happened the last time that he tried to do that. So I would encourage you, Mr. Chair, to rein that in before he gets going too far down a path he does not want to head down. And while he's at it, tell the truth.
Okay, so colleagues, once again, there was nothing unparliamentary stated by the member, but I would ask all colleagues and members to use language. This is a reminder for everybody on committee to use language that's appropriate and focus on the study and the questions.
Absolutely.
On hand. Thank you, Mr. Angus. The floor is yours.
I want to apologize to my Conservative colleagues deeply for talking about facts, because I know that makes them it winds them up. So I just want to go back to what we were talking about. Ms. Tobin, you mentioned the provincial veto power that the province has. So the Conservative provincial government shut down an oil and gas proposal. If the feds had tried to push it through, the province has the veto power, or if the feds tried to push it through to stop it, the province has a veto. Correct? That's how the Accord works?
More or less, yeah.
More or less, yes.
Yeah.
It's going to be really helpful for my Conservative colleagues, because they really don't want to have this come out. They think that Justin Trudeau brought up this bill and all the oil and gas companies ran away, but they're really opposed to fact that this legislation will allow the province to make decisions about offshore wind without a veto.
Point of order. On Monday and
to stop this
repeatedly, I have
proposal.
said that Conservatives support the inclusion of provincial ministers in Bill C-49. We have said that repeatedly. That remains our position. Again, MP Angus should start telling the truth.
Colleagues, once again, procedurally, that is not a point of order. So there'll be an opportunity for the member when they speak to clear the record and answer the questions as to the members here.
Well, maybe a point of order could be that, Chair, you could ask my colleague to apologize to me for invoking an image of my jaw breaking.
I would ask the member, once again, colleagues, to use point of orders that are procedurally relevant.
Thank you.
But I would ask my colleague to proceed and focus on questions on C-49.
I'm just trying to work my way through the dark labyrinths of where the Conservatives have gone on this, because they said they're going to oppose the legislation. So if they're opposing the legislation, they're going to oppose the right of Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and Labrador to create an offshore industry. So they have said they're going to oppose this, but yet we have a veto power for the provinces, correct, under the Accord. So if we update this and there's problems on offshore wind, which I know my Conservative colleagues, who knows what will set them off on that. But if the province doesn't like it, they'll have the veto on that as well, correct?
Yes, under the Accord Acts, there are certain decisions that the offshore boards can make that require the ratification of ministers. In the instance of where there is a disagreement, the province has the veto if we are in times of security of supply, and that was my more or less.
So that's just what I'm trying to get through in terms of facts. The province has a veto, and they really don't want them to have that veto. They want Pierre Poilievre to have the veto over the legislation.
Point of order, Chair. That's untrue.
So
we have said that we absolutely support the inclusion of provincial ministers, and as I said in my opening comments on Monday, Conservatives recognize that that's why the provincial government of
to turn off
Newfoundland
your
and Nova
mic.
Scotia.
This is not a point of order.
Support
that you
We have-
C49 because of their inclusion, and we
Ms.
support the
Stubbs.
Liberals' inclusion of the
Please.
provincial
Ms. Stubbs,
ministers'
I'll ask
jurisdiction
you-
in
Respect for the rest of
C49.
us.
I will ask all colleagues to respect the rules of this committee, and
or
it
perhaps you
begins
could
with.
just let me finish
It
my
begins
point.
with if you make a point of order when you're recognized, you can proceed with your point of order.
Point of order.
But procedurally, that we do not use point of orders for debate.
Point of
Mr. Kelly, you have a point of order. Go ahead.
Yes, it is a rule of the it is a standing order that members may not mislead a committee. They can't mislead Parliament. This is a creature of Parliament, and you can't mislead. What
Point of
Ms.
order?
What Ms. Stubbs has her point of order was under the rubric of misleading committee. It
So-
is her point that this member, the member for that Charlie Angus, had misled the committee.
So,
That is a point of order. You can rule one way or another, but it is
Kelly,
a point of order.
Thank you for that, but that was not stated at the time, and
Yes, it
of
was.
what you
So,
just said.
a Mr. point of
But
order-
Mr. Angus does have a point of order on your point of order. I let you
yes.
finish, so I want Mr. Angus
Well, I'm looking
on a
at
point of order.
I'm looking at the Blues where the Conservatives said they're going to oppose the legislation. If they change their mind in this meeting, I am more than willing to withdraw and work with them. But they are on the record that they're going to oppose this legislation. So I said that. That's a fact.
Mr. Angus.
Facts hurt sometimes.
Okay,
my
so colleagues, once again,
colleagues.
Well, now
before
you're
we
talking
engage
about a
into a
different
number of
issue.
point of orders and everybody starts turning on their mics, which we've had this conversation before, number of times over several months, of numerous members turning on their mics at the same time, speaking into the mics. Our interpreters, unfortunately, cannot interpret when we have 5 mics on. Everybody's aware of that. Everybody knows that, but we continue to do it. So please, for our interpreters, so they can do their jobs, we don't turn on our mics and all make comments into the mics. I will ask colleagues, you'll get an opportunity to speak, and at your time, if there's something on the record you'd like to clarify or ask questions to our witnesses, you can do so at that time. Now, we've gone through all the point of orders. You have a point of order, Mr. Kelly?
Not a new one, on the point of order that was just raised.
Okay, so I'll recognize you on the point of order.
Yes.
That was just raised. Go ahead.
That the member had, in fact, made a whole series of statements in addition to the one that he offered as a clarification. He went to motive. He spoke of the motive of Ms. Stubbs. He spoke to the motive of which he is in no position to do. These were statements that are incorrect, and I merely point out that Ms. Stubbs had objected to the member misleading the committee by making up his own facts as to motive with respect to the Conservative position.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, on your point of order. We'll now proceed back. We have colleagues. We have 9 minutes. We have 9 minutes left. I've recognized everybody. What I'm going to allow, I think, for the remaining 9-10 minutes that we have, maybe a round, if colleagues agree, for 2.5 minutes each for each party. It's a quick round. We can have 2.5 minutes each, starting with the Conservatives and with the Liberals, and then we can proceed to the other members. If everybody's fine with that, that will end the meeting right on time, or plus or minus a minute. We're good. I don't see no objections. Okay, Mr. Small, for 2.5 minutes.
Sorry,
Go
I
ahead.
have a point of order, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
so before you begin, Mr. Small, go ahead. Ms. Jones on a point of order.
Thank you. Because my colleague, Mr. Kelly, raised the issue, I think it's important that I reiterate as well several things that were said in this committee that have been infactual, incorrect. I think he referred to as made-up facts and misleading facts. I'd like to recognize that on Monday in committee, the member for Costa Bay, Central Newfoundland, stated that CAP was not supportive of C49. We now know that was not accurate. CAP did outline concerns that they had in a letter. They have not stated that they are not supportive of the legislation. Secondly, Mr. Chair, it was stated that the premiers were hoodwinked and wool was pulled over their eyes. We now know that was an incorrect statement, and neither Premier Furey or the Premier of Nova Scotia was hoodwinked in any way. And it was also insinuated that the FFAW was never consulted. And while today he used Katie Power's name in committee, I just read the article, yes, there is concerns that have been outlined by Katie Power of the FFAW, first time that I was aware of it. But certainly she did state in the article that she was consulted. She had attended both virtually and in person several meetings. So if we want to get facts straight at this table,
Point of order, Mr.
I
Chair.
say to Mr. Kelly that those facts and those insinuations have to stop, and they are applied to all members.
Ms. Jones,
Mr.
thank
Chair.
you. I'm going to recognize you, Mr. Small. I don't think we're going to get to the start of this round and finish, so I'm going to recognize you in a moment. Ms. Jones, thank you for your point of order. It's not a procedural issue on your point of order, so thank you for that. Colleagues, I'll encourage you again not to use a point of order for debate, but on the procedural relevance of your point of order. So I'm going to go to the point of order over here, then I'm going to go to you, Mr. Angus, on a point of order after the member over here. Mr. Small, go ahead on the point of order. And relevance procedurally,
absolutely.
please.
Mr. Chair, I'm not going to rip apart all the careless handling of the truth which Ms. Jones just displayed there. But in terms of Katie Power and the FFAW, what I said was that they weren't consulting in the creating of this bill. They were consulted afterwards. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your point of order. Once again, you have lots of time to clarify the record when it's your opportunity to ask questions and provide clarification. Once again, procedural relevance when we use a point of order, not to debate. Mr. Angus, go ahead on the point of order.
Thank you. I may be willing to withdraw everything I just said because I was trying to deal with facts, and I realize that that's really set people off. But I wanted a clarification from Monday because, and this is maybe why I ended up trying to scratch my head about the Conservatives opposing jobs in Newfoundland and Labrador. It was Mr. Smalls, and I quote him. He said, "We oppose this legislation. We voted for it. Obviously, we oppose it." And in my 20 years in Parliament, I didn't know that when you voted for something, it meant you opposed something. So if my colleague is opposing it, you vote against it. But since he said he was voting for it, which obviously meant he opposed it, I got confused. But I did hear them say again and again that they oppose this legislation, which would oppose the right of Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia, where they have a veto over these projects, to actually exercise that veto. So if he votes for it and he opposes it, could he just clarify where the heck are they going on this thing? Because I feel like I'm getting tossed at sea.
Mr. Angus, thank you for your point of order, but once again, procedural relevance on your point of order. We're not going to use point of orders for debate, and other members are not going to use a point of order to respond. You have an opportunity.
No, point of order, Mr.
Hold on. When I'm done, ma'am, I'll go to you on a point of order, but you have an opportunity if you want to engage in debate with each other in the House of Commons, or you have an opportunity to ask questions and get answers from our witnesses who've taken time out of their schedules to come here to do so. Now, Ms. Stubbs, on the point of order.
Well, you did just say that there wouldn't be responses, but since you did allow Mr. Angus to make his point.
I just want to make sure we have procedural relevance. If you can state what it is, you can continue.
You acknowledge his point of order and you let him make his speech, so I'm assuming you're going to apply your approach equally to me. And so in response to his point of order, I will just clarify, because I know he's wondering. Conservatives oppose Bill C-49 because it will end Atlantic offshore petroleum development, which the private sector already showed by putting in 0 bids after this legislation was introduced, which clearly gave them the signal. And you can see that because the year before there were 5 bids worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And we also oppose Bill C-49 because it will introduce uncertainty, a lack of clarity, and is based on unconstitutionals from C-69, which will open it up to challenges. And it will hinder the development of offshore renewable technology too. That, to be clear, is why Conservatives oppose Bill C-69. We will accelerate traditional oil and gas.
Ms. Stubbs, I'll ask you to hold right there.
I'm going to conclude right now so we don't talk over each other.
But I want you to hold because we have another point of order.
Conservatives will accelerate traditional oil and gas development and light green projects.
I'll ask you to hold.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Brewster, on the point of order. Once again, before you begin, I do not want colleagues to use procedural relevance. You raised a point of order, Mr. Bruson. Go ahead.
Well, two things. I would like to clarify that when the chair is speaking, that we're not supposed to speak over the chair. I believe that's established as a practice and a rule. But additionally, we have here officials. And so I'm just wondering if we can go to our last 2 minutes. I'm just looking at my phone to see we have 2 minutes left. If we can take those 2 minutes to get some questions answered still.
So thank you, Mr. Bruson. Colleagues, I will remind everybody, as Mr. Bruson has said, that when the chair is speaking, that we don't interrupt and speak, but one person speak at a time, as you're recognized by the chair. But I do want to take an opportunity to thank officials for coming today. We are at the end of time. We won't get an additional round in that I was hoping to do. But thank you so much for your testimony and answering questions and for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us and informing the work we've done in Bill C-49 on this bill. So thank you and have a great day. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Adjourned. All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.